Alright, what is up everyone? Mekkah here, and welcome to another edition of not just a big tier list, but the biggest Fire Emblem character tier list you've ever seen. Edition number 8, I do believe. And today we're going to go over some GBA units from 6, 7, and 8. And then we have a little bit of Path of Radiance as well for us in store. And then we have one more part left after this with this batch, and I'm going to post a new one on my Patreon. And it will be out before the end of August. In case you don't know how it works, real quick, I'm going to tier every single Fire Emblem character tier lists. Every single Fire Emblem character based on their usefulness within the game, you know, as units, not as characters, but as units. And I'm going to do all of them eventually, but if you'd like your character to be done next, you can consider becoming my Patreon, because my Patreons get to decide who goes next. So these characters were all submitted by my lovely Patreons. I'm going to thank them right now for all their help, because without their help I wouldn't be able to make big videos like the ones I have in store coming up. I pay editors, I pay a designer, and I generally just get goodies for my channel by buying stuff like materials. So thank you guys a lot. Lucas submitted Roy and Rutger from the Binding Blade, and then Trek was submitted by Mo. Patreon Potato submitted Wendy. Nime was submitted by P. Vladias, and the same goes for you. I noticed a trend that like lately a lot of people tend to submit characters, that people that get to submit them in pairs, they're the higher tier Patreons, they tend to submit pairs that make sense, like Nime and you, because you know, family. That's kind of cute. T-Class 45 submitted Fear. Jagan submitted Zeus. Hunty Shurik submitted Zealots, or Zealot as I used to call him in the FE6 0% growth run with Don Don. Inazuma Frost submitted Milady. Dorcas submitted Geese. Furon submitted Percival. Yeetus, of course, submitted Rebecca. Abaddon 1810 submitted Wrath. Samer 206 submitted Nino. God, the one and only, submitted Artur. Two people submitted Cormag, actually, Pipler and Hunty Shurix. Quick tip, if you don't want a character to be doubled up on and like kind of waste your slot, double check the thread with the submissions, or maybe provide a backup if you're not sure, you don't have the time to check. I generally think it's a good idea to check, it doesn't take that much time. But yeah, try to prevent that if you want your submissions to be not wasted, because I can't chase after everyone to change their submissions, you know, but you know, there's always next month. Joshua submitted Seth, not vice versa. I double checked. There's a person named Joshua who submitted Seth. La Rochelle was submitted by Takiras. Boots42 submitted Ross and Garcia. Alexis submitted Largo. Corey submitted Khalil. Arkholt submitted Rolf, and Titania was submitted by Ozymandias. I'm probably screwing it up every time, but I'm sorry, but I appreciate the gesture, you know, thanks a lot. So let's go ahead and tier them. I'm splitting these in 3 for a reason. They always get really long, so let's get into it. So Binding Blade, pretty hard game, pretty strong enemies. Player phase pretty important. Enemy phase, having a good enemy phase, pretty difficult. So we have Roy forced into every map, so free deployment slot, pretty cool. The downside is you can't rearrange where he goes. He has a personal weapon, the Rapier. It has the same might as an Iron Sword. Unfortunately, it didn't get buffed until FE7. But at least it's triple might, so it's pretty good against Cavaliers. Not against Nomads, because they're not effective against those. It's always kind of annoying, Chapter 4. Not that great against Armor Knights. It kind of really sucks that pretty much every enemy that Rapier is effective against, it loses a couple points of might because of the weapon triangle. It kind of factors into the equation of the effectiveness thing. But nonetheless, Roy is, I wouldn't say he's a good unit early on, but the thing about early game FE6 is it's pretty tough. Units get overpowered by the enemies. The enemies have like extra stat boosts on top of the Harper bonuses they would have already gotten. Enemies get notoriously weaker after Chapter 5. But until then, you kind of need all the help you can get. And Roy, I wouldn't say he's one of your strongest characters or one of your fastest characters, but he's one of the more accurate people. And he does have the niche of the Rapier, being able to deal effective damage against like Cavaliers in Chapter 4 and Chapter 7. Mostly, and then some in Chapter 4, in Chapter 3 as well. So that is pretty nice. Then after that, he's pretty mediocre. He's blessed with that amazing Fire Emblem Lord that promotes late, you know, thing. Where he just doesn't promote until Chapter 22, basically, the start of Chapter 22. And assuming you get the good ending, he has like 3-4 chapters to be good in. I like Roy at that point. I think he's really good with the Binding Blade, gives him +5 defense, +5 resistance, pretty powerful weapon, 1-2 range and everything. But until then, he's pretty crap. And even once he gets it, I think he gets a little bit overrated. It's not that I don't think he's strong, but I think his relative power compared to other characters isn't that high. Because at that point, you're probably using all the legendary weapons to kill Manakits anyway, so Roy isn't exactly doing more damage than everyone else. His main advantage is 1-2 range, so he can kill Manakits without taking a counter. And, you know, having pretty good stats. It's like, after promotion is like fine. They're not as great as some other people are, but the durability is nice from the Sword of Seals. But Other than the 1-2 range, there's not a whole lot of advantage over using Roy over anyone else. He's good against the final boss, but until then he's basically the same as someone like Shin or Rutger. Like, sure, those are really good units, but he's not much better than them, so it doesn't stand out as much. And I think he's definitely a lot worse throughout the game than a lot of other characters. Like, not even just like okay. The sword lock isn't his biggest problem. I think swords are a fine weapon type to have in FE6. We're gonna see with Rutger. Like, it wouldn't be that much better with lances or axes. Those are pretty inaccurate. That would bring issues of its own. The main problem is really just 5 move and no way to promote. And that kind of sucks. Everything else is like kind of whatever, but the lack of like additional anything besides 5 move and 1 range is just kind of eh. Mostly you just spend your time like ferrying him around, but you kind of want to train him if you're playing FE6 for the first time, because it probably makes your life easier. Once you've played it a couple times, you could try not using Roy. I would recommend trying that at least once. It's kind of annoying that he has like, he dies instantly to like a bolting attack or whatever. But you actually find that like base Roy with an angelic robe actually does okay at surviving things he needs to. And all he needs to do is seize anyway. You don't have to use the guy even though he's been deployed. So I generally recommend training him to keep him safe, especially in an Iron Man. But I don't think he's mandatory to be used. And even at base level, he can sort of function with the Binding Blade. I don't remember how much speed he needs to double with the against the Manicheets. But it probably not. It's not probably not 20 levels of speed. You know, he's probably gonna be do fine. So I'm thinking like D tier or maybe C tier. But honestly, I think a D tier is that might be a bit too harsh. I think it's more compared to F Sacred Stone's Erica. A little worse maybe. I think Erica's early game is relatively better. She does double attack in a situation where a lot of people don't double attack yet. So she has that as kind of a standout thing. Her promotion, it comes relatively late too, but not as late as Roy's, so I'm kind of fine with having him around here. I think these are both like pretty crappy lords overall, but you know, they can do work in the early game at least. So it makes sense to have them at a similar position, I think. And yes, I know FE8 is easier than FE6. I'm already giving them both credit for their early game contributions, but I don't think they're too different in that regard. Next up, we have Rutger. Also sword locked, also doesn't have a mount, but much better in FE6. Probably one of the best units. We're just going to straight up go to the S tier right here, because this is where it's going to get interesting, okay? So the reason Swordmasters and Myrmidons and units like that don't really get much credit in FE7 and FE8 and other games where the enemies are very easy is the enemies are pretty easy, and it's more important that you have a 1-2 range or mounts than like high speed to double or high skill for good accuracy, because most people have reliable accuracy and most people are able to double in games like FE7, FE8, FE9. Even in FE5. So stat thresholds to do those kind of things aren't very high. FE6 is very different. FE6 has stronger enemies, they actually have luck, they have a decent amount of avoid, so the high accuracy of Rutger is appreciated. Iron Lances and Iron Axes, just look it up, they are pretty, like, significantly less accurate in FE6. The weapon triangle is less strong in FE6, it's 10% rather than 50%, so relatively speaking, the player's going to have less hit because they're usually having the weapon triangle in their advantage. And javelins and hand axes are terrible in FE6. To the point where they just like, they can hit stuff, like if you double with one, you'll probably hit at least once, usually about once. But in FE7 and FE8, most people are just fine with javelins as long as they've been trained enough and promoted. They'll just kill everything with javelins, but that's not the case in FE6. In FE6, those weapons are kind of trash. They're still usable, but they're not very good. So the importance of having 1-2 range is not as high in FE6. It's more important that you have good 1-range offense. And, if an enemy's going to throw a javelin at you and go uncountered, it's kind of fine. They're probably not going to hit you anyway. And it's more important that you actually survive, because that's actually a challenge. So, with that in mind, and with the fact that thrones in FE6 give a massive amount of avoid, and you're looking for someone accurate enough to hit them, that's where Rutger comes in with like an Armor Slayer or the Killing Edge and just get rid of them easy way. Like, it's so much easier to play FE6 when you have a Rutger, especially once they've been promoted early, like around Chapter 8, Chapter 8X. I usually promote him with the first Hero Crest. He just kicks all sorts of ass on everything. He's an easy win button, especially with, like, as I said before, Killing Edge, Woe Dow, those give him like easily up to like 70 crit. If you're willing to wait for support, it can even go up to like 100 crit. He's reliable at critting stuff, and that's a pretty good way to make up for average strength, and his strength isn't even bad, it's just average. He can 2-hit KO sometimes with like a heavier weapon, but most of the time I just find him critting stuff. Super good, joins super early. Definitely goes, I would say S+ is fair. We're gonna get another FE6 really good unit later on, I think. Yeah, it's gonna be in this one. I'd say like his boss killing rivals Asbel, for example, from FE5, and like that's really stand out. So I'm kind of tempted to just put him on here. Kind of tempted to like, he's as good as like Sita and Asbel are at boss killing basically. Not, He doesn't one-round kill bosses most of the time because bosses are that bulky, but everyone else is doing so much worse in this game that, relatively speaking, I think their performance against bosses is about the same compared to other people. So I'm okay with putting Rutger like all the way up here. I think he's that good. I think he's that great. Let me know if you're wrong though. Like I'm always up to revisions on this tier list. I'm gonna wait a little bit until I've got like a ton of units on here, and I maybe pause submissions for a little bit until I review it. I've said it before. I'm gonna take a look at it with other people, but that's gonna wait a little bit. So that's Rutger. Next we have a Trek. And Trek is a unit I've never used long term. But just looking at his stats, you can tell why he's usually overlooked. I think the big thing that makes people miss out on Trek on their like first blind playthroughs is just they get Alan Lance earlier, and once they have him, they don't really see a reason to ditch them for Trek because they might have built up supports. They probably build up more levels and stat growths. Trek isn't. If Trek is like better than base level Alan and Lance, so he's probably not going to compete with them when they're promoted. And players build attachments to the characters they get earliest, so someone like Trek just gets overlooked. He's more like a comedic relief character. I tiered Noah before, and that's probably the reason why Trek was submitted here, just so he could be compared. Trek is obviously worse than Noah. I remember one thing about Trek, is that his weapon levels are pretty trash. Like, Noah actually has a C rank in sword use, like the killing edge at base, and Trek has no notable weapon level advantage. I believe he has either D lances, E swords, or vice versa. It's pretty bad either way, no matter what it is, so I'm not even going to look it up. I just know it's pretty hot garbo. A lot of people have trouble keeping him alive in his joining chapter in chapter 7. In normal mode, it shouldn't be too difficult. He doesn't die that easily, but I can understand why in hard mode, because most people by now know, I think, the trick to like recruiting Zealot on turn 2 and alongside getting Noah. But then it can be pretty hectic to get Zealot or Roy over the Trek to recruit him. So I understand that difficulty, but if you're not going to use him, it's probably not worth resetting the chapter completely to keep him alive, because he's not that great, unless you're planning on using him for fun, because he's a pretty comedic character. I'm trying to see where Noah is. He's in B- tier, which I think is appropriate. I mean, he's still in a pretty good class as a Cavalier. 7 move is like really good. 2 weapon types is nice. He's too slow to double much of anything besides like Steel Axe Pirates or like Armor Knights or Soldiers. So really heavily weighed down enemies. So don't count on him to double anytime soon. He's probably going to get doubled by Mercenaries as well. So pretty troublesome. Maybe he'll double Steelbow Archers on the Isles if you get lucky. I don't remember. But he's got some issues to work with. It's like if you try using an armor leveled Lance or Alan or one that got RNG screwed, but in chapter 7 instead with worse weapon levels. That's what it feels like to me. Whenever I even try to look at Trek's combat. He's not unusable, but it's pretty annoying. I would say he's better than a lot for sure, and better than a lot of these characters, because like long term you can sort of turn into something like a Paladin is never a bad thing, but his stats are just so mediocre overall that's not really worth all the trouble. I'd say about here is fine. It kind of reminds me of Tristan, the way he works. I'm trying to like relate to other characters like that. I think it's better than a lot. Just rescue drop utility is pretty good, even if you're not training him. And if you're gonna train both up, I think he will overall provide you with more utility. But yeah, he definitely got some issues. He's not bad though. He's like kind of in the middle of FE6 units. There's a lot of trash units in FE6, but there's also a lot of better units. So I think it's fair to put him here. An entire tier below Lu seems a bit weird, but Lu does have like much better long-term prospects and some better early game utility as well. So I think it's like there's worse things than a tier difference between Lu and Trek, even though Trek has more durability. It's like the one thing that Trek sort of makes him stand out. He's got better durability growth, I think, than most of the other Cavs and indeed most of the other units, but it's not that useful. And in FE6 you can actually rely on dodge tanking quite a lot compared to bulk because hit rates are so low. So I think this makes sense. Okay, we have a Wendy. I used Wendy, believe it or not. I used an Armor Knight like Wendy in my FE6 Iron Man, just to style a little bit, just to make the playthrough a little bit more interesting, because it was going so well. I was like, you know what, we can probably train Wendy. To give you an idea of what it took to train her, I had to surround archers and have her take them down like hit by hit. And normally, if you get like archers surrounded with most characters, they take like a couple turns to take them out. Take that couple turns and then double it, because Wendy misses half the time because she's so inaccurate. None of her base stats are good. Like, none of them are good. Some of them are passable. Like, I remember her defense being okay. But everything else is just trash. It's like, I don't know. Imagine Radiant Dawn Meg, but in a game where everyone is much better. And it's just kind of like the same as Meg, but much less accurate for one. Like, Lances in FE6 are just trash and accuracy. And it doesn't help that you get into the Western Isles soon and you have to deal with a bunch of enemy axe users. But even against like a mage or an archer, she just doesn't look that good. It was a pain, but it ended up paying off. I ended up using Wendy all game long. She survived. She killed Zephiel. She did everything she had to do. But it took many blood, sweat, and tears. You can train Wendy though. It's possible, but they made it as hard as they possibly could, and I enjoyed every minute of it. She's just total trash. She's worse than Amelia, honestly. Probably worse than Lyra as well. Shanam is the worst unit I don't even know anymore. I know Bargain exists, but it's really not that good. But I don't know if he should be worse than Wendy. I think he's better than Wendy. Wendy is ultra trash fighting. Like, it's one thing if a unit is just like not very useful, like Lorenz just never turns into anything, but at least at base level he's sort of useful for something. But goddamn, this having to put so much work into a unit to make him mediocre is annoying. My Wendy got RNG blessed too. Like, her performance was absolutely peak in that playthrough. I think I might have even given her boots. I think I did, yeah. I think I did. Yeah, Wendy was fun to use, but goddamn, never again. Nime, a unit that for a long time was like really underappreciated by a lot of people. And I'm talking a long time ago. Nowadays, I think most people know how good she is, but now times are much different. Back then, it was like, all right, level 18 Druid, but trash, ash durability, like horrible HP and defense, to the point where she gets almost one-shot by a bunch of enemies. And only 2 level ups to gain, level 18, really? And then her growths are awful? Like, why would you use her? Turns out the answer is her base magic is really high, and her base weapon ranks are really high. A rank in Dark, A rank in Staves, in a game where warp skipping is viable and very rewarding. The warp staff in FE6 comes in chapter 14, a couple chapters before Nime joins, and has +5 range compared to, I believe, FE7 and FE8. Has a much higher base warp range, and on top of her good magic already, it's just really rewarding to use. And FE6 is kind of like a game that kind of wants you to warp skip, it feels like sometimes. It doesn't trivialize it, because the thrones are heavily guarded by strong bosses with a lot of avoid and other powerful enemies. So it's very rare that you can actually go, okay, warp burst boss killer, dance the warper, warp in Roy, kill the boss, and seize. That's rare. But there's a lot of situations where the game puts a bunch of terrain in your way, like an Ilya or Sakai, and a bunch of enemies, and it says, alright, if you want to try warp skipping this, you can plan around it and make a pretty good one. And it still takes some brain power, but the game wants you to, because every objective is seized, so you can do it to all maps, but you have to be a little bit careful how you use them. But you do get to have warp in a pretty good time frame, and you get the hammer and staff pretty quickly afterwards as well, so you have plenty of shots to use warp. The game really incentivizes it, and warping is Nime's main utility, but you can use other staffs too. Restore is pretty good for curing status effects. FE6 is full of those. Barrier is always useful. Rescue staff is also available before Nime joins, so all that kind of utility is available. Her use of dark magic is pretty nice too. A lot of people would like advocate using, for example, Ray, because he's the only dark magic user you get or whatever. Not really, but you know, one of the few. The only long-term one, I guess we could call him. But Apocalypse is, I usually nowadays view it as like Nime's personal weapon, because I don't really like using Ray or let alone Sophia anymore. And Apocalypse on Nime, it's really good for killing Manichees if you get in range for that, but I think it's mostly useful for the +5 magic bonus. They don't really do that anymore, having weapons boost your magic, probably because they realize, oh, that increases your staff range, and that's pretty busted. That gives you even more range. It lets you warp skip maps like chapter 21, well, not 21 because you don't have Apocalypse that, but 22 and 23 with so much warp range, and that's super nice. But it also has a kick-ass animation and it kills Manichees, so that's pretty cool. So I think Nime is great. Her main like hindrance is of course the durability thing. Having to give her like angelic rope just to survive shit. Need like a body ring to not get doubled while she uses Nosferatu. But Nosferatu tanking is another great way to keep her alive if you're worried about that. And lack of availability is also a thing. She only joins into the route split of Ilya Sakai, like chapter 18 from the top of my head. That is quite far into the game. So I think she's similar to Saleh and Pent. I think she's better than them. So I want to put it just like above them, I guess. I still think she's like really good. And if you're doing like an FE6 draft of some kind, she's worth an like fairly early pick, because there's not that many good staff rank users in FE6, but they're very rewarding to use. And especially for like a draft race, you don't want to spend too much time grinding staff rank. So having someone like Nime or Yoder, I guess, but he joins even later, is like really nice. But other than that, you're kind of screwed when it comes to high staff rank units. The best you got is like Saul with C rank and a promotion. So Nime is pretty low investment but highly useful, but you can invest into her and make her like better at combat through like an angelic robe. You get one pretty early on in Ilya, or in a pretty like nice timing to give it to Nime. And the body ring, you get that pretty quickly as well, I think. So that can be useful to like keep her but her base speed is pretty good, so she can double like Armor Knight, for example. And I recommend you build up her dark rank when you can, because Apocalypse, it does take quite a while before you actually can use it. Going from A rank to S rank is still 50 weapon XP, so it takes a while. Then we have you, also from FE6. I don't remember if I ever paid full money for you and used him as much as I could. I don't really like spending money on units I don't have to, and he's not that great. The one funny thing about you is sometimes with a certain translation patch, you recruit him, he's like 42 magic, and it stays that way until he levels up and it becomes 20, I think, or when you reset the game it becomes 20. That's a bit of a glitch that happens when he levels down as you give him less money. He's supposed to have around 15 or 14, I do believe, which is good, but it's not like fantastic. If you do want to use him, you kind of want to pay him full price. I'm not going to hold that against him too much because I think gold is plentiful for most casual players. It is money that could go towards like stat boosters like boots in chapter 21, but for the most part, it's not a big deal for casual FE6 players. And when you use you, he seems fairly competent to me, not super great, but he's got his uses. You know, mages, if you don't have to go through the initial period of grinding them up like Lu and Lidina, they're actually a pretty good class to be, one to range but high accuracy, and use durability is like okay, it's not fantastic, but it's better than theirs for the most part from what I can tell. So I wouldn't mind trying out you one day. He seems pretty decent, but of course the lack of availability is a bit of an issue. But this is a unit I have little to no experience really trying to use. I know he doubles Armor Knights in his joining chapter, and that's about it. He can use our Caliber to beat like the Ilya Pegasus Knights. You can counter Sakei and Nomads with some fair accuracy. Just don't get him doubled, because I think he might get doubled by some guys if he's not been trained enough. You could early promote him. He does come at a pretty high base level, I believe 12 or 14. But I would recommend getting a couple level ups maybe before he like completely halt his growth. I know that sounds out of character for me, but that's what I recommend. But I don't have a lot of experience with you, so comment section go away. I did use him a lot in reverse recruitment, because then he joins like really early for free, and it's a very different ball game. But I'm not gonna raise him based off how he did in like a custom made hack. So I'm gonna put him like around here somewhere. Around lot seems fair. Better or worse than May, I don't know. He seems alright. Maybe he's a D tier, maybe he's a C tier. Not sure. I haven't really used him a whole lot, but yeah, on paper he looks pretty good. I just remember being disappointed in practice, which is why I don't want to rate him higher. But in theory, he seems like a okay unit, but not fantastic. So that kind of fits in C tier for me. Next meme is Fear. We have, as I said before, we have a lot of Binding Blade. We have a lot of Binding Blade today. We have Fear. Level 1 Myrmidon that joins at the Western Isles in the middle of a Sea of Axis. That's pretty easy grinding fodder, you know, that's a pretty easy way to raise her. Fear usually gets compared to Rutger, and of course that's pretty unfavorable because, I mean, we've rated Rutger before. He's in ES Plus tier, he's hard to compete with. But I think it's fair to rate Fear on her own merits. And she does have those merits. For a level 1 unit, her strength is pretty good. It's like 9 or 10 in Hector, not Hector Harp mode, FE6 Harp mode, so that's pretty okay. Her growth is trash, sure. But in the long term, her strength is like serviceable, especially since she has the Swordmaster crit bonus of 30%. I forgot to mention that for Rutger because it kind of goes without saying, but that's what makes Swordmasters so good in FE6 as well, is their need for like good offense coupled with like a higher crit bonus than they get in like FE7 and FE8. So that's what makes people like Fear and Rutger and I guess not Corel so good. Whew. It's really hot in here, by the way. That's why I'm panting. Fear is, I would say she's good, but I don't think she's great. It's like budget Rutger still seems like a good thing. I'm kind of reminded like Halvin and Orson, where Halvin was usually given a pass by a lot of people because Orson was so good. And I'm trying not to do the same for Fear, but I still think Fear has a lot of the tools that also make Rutger good. So I'm just trying to like think like, okay, it's Rutger, but she joins much later, more unleveled, and less strength, which is a pretty big problem. Worse durability as well. No early game utility. So I'm thinking like B- for her, maybe upper C. If I were to split the C tier into two, I would probably get to C+ for Fear 2, because I do think she's a pretty competent unit. Obviously, it takes some grinding, but I'm not like completely unconvinced that if you were to like LTC this playthrough or whatever, FE6 or whatever, she probably could still be raised if you really wanted to. It's not great, but you could probably still do it. I think she's more useful than some, for example, Joshua from FE8, and maybe not as useful as like the FE6 pre-promotes. She joins around at the same time as Klein. So definitely want to have her near Klein, because they have not a similar thing going on, but like Klein joins good and then gets somewhat worse as the game goes on, whereas Fear joins much worse than Klein, but grows into something much more useful than he is for most of the game. So I think Fear overall is a little bit better than Klein for sure. And I'll probably put her over Vida and Daisy too. I don't know about Ford. Fuck Ford. go above Ford. Here we go. Yeah, this seems fair, and it might seem high for a unit that's so on a level, like level 1, but it doesn't really hurt her, I think, that she's so low level. I'd rather have a bunch of extra level ups in speed and skill to maximize your strong points. Maybe get a couple points of strength. I know it's only 25% growth, but it's gotta come from somewhere, right? And then you know, she turns into something good, unlike this guy over here. And she's gonna promote later on Rutger. Rutger's probably gonna promote with the Chapter 7 Hero Crest. But if you're not using Rutger, you're not using too many other Hero Crest units, then I think Fear isn't really hurt by her you know, her low level. She can just promote whenever she wants, whenever you feel like she's ready. I would probably do it as soon as she caps skill and speed. That kind of maximizes her stat growth. That's like a nice middle point. I don't know if she usually does that by level 10, but like somewhere between level 10 and level 15 seems fair. I don't see a reason to wait until 20. So I don't think her low level is a big issue. It's actually more helpful than anything at first, because it makes her grow so fast. And yes, that's totally out of character for me, but I think Fear is fairly usable and pretty good. Then we have Zeus. Now, speaking of reverse recruitment memes, this guy was a huge meme in my reverse recruitment run, because Zeus joins quite early there, and he was infamous for missing a lot. And that is really the main issue with Zeus in the main game too, is his low accuracy at base, as well as his low speed. He joins past halfway through the game, chapter 16 basically, when you're almost done with it probably, because he's like in the far corner of the map. Gotta talk to him with Milady, who we're gonna talk about soon. And you know, he's still a really good class. You know, Wyvern Rider, you can't really go wrong with a flying class in a game like FE6. Especially with so many maps coming up with a lot of terrain. He's got a high 8, he can recruit, or he can rescue almost anyone. But his low base speed really holds him back. Like, the Harpo bonuses, everyone brings up the Harpo bonuses and super high strength, and those are great and everything. Like, he hits really hard in a single hit if he connects a hit. But the combination of like the other things that he has really hold him back, I feel like. Low speed, and then the low weapon level of D lances means he's unable to use killer lances. Now the crit of the killer lances, it's kind of whatever to me. He doesn't need that at base because he doesn't double, so trying to make him crit reliably isn't really a factor here. But the main draw for him using killer lances is he gets more hit with it. Same goes for Horse Slayers. He would love to be able to use Horse Slayer on, for example, the Cavaliers in 16x, but he can't because he's got D lances at base, and getting up there, he's got to build weapon rank, and for that he gets like a max of 2 per battle, because he would probably finish something off that someone else has weakened, but he's not doubling anything, so building up weapon rank quickly is also pretty hard for him. He's only at like level 7, I do believe, so a lot of room to grow, and eventually once you train him, he's going to become like a fine unit. He's still going to have some speed issues, but I think at least he can double like Steel Lance Wyvern enemies, and some more like enemy archers and unpromoted stuff like that. It's not a strong point still, but he's high strength and high mobility and high HP, good defense. They all make up for it once he's promoted, but getting him there is the hard part, and you got to be willing to train him for that. Illusion Whip's not a problem. You can get one of those. There's plenty of those in FE6. It's one of the few items there's not an issue with, like Night Crest and Hero Crest. Those are a pain in the butt, man. But Illusion Whips, those are fine. So those are the main problems with Z's. And the question is, are you willing to work through it? It's probably worth it if you do it in the end. Like, you'll probably always get a return on your investment in Z's if you have a slot for him and if you want to use him. But I'm not going to say this is a great unit. I can't, with my full confidence, say, hey, this guy, you got to use him. He's super good. But he sure was fun to use, at least. Tons of fun memes with this guy. Let's see. Something like the higher C tier is like appropriate for him. I wouldn't put him in B, like not even B minus. Sure, he's a flyer, but the lack of availability and the slow start make him not want to put him very high in C. I do think probably better than Fear overall, and better than like these low availability guys. I'm gonna put him at the top of C, I think. That feels like a good place for him overall. No, he's not as good as Sister, but that doesn't mean we can't judge him on his own merits. Just like Fear and Rutger, and they're not related, but you get the point, right? Class by class comparison is not necessary. On his own, I think Z stands out as a fine unit, but not an actually great one. So below the B tier seems appropriate for him. These B tier units, they all seem like a lot more solid than he is. He's a lot more, not fragile, but like weird. Alright, next thing we got is Zealot from FE6, also known as Jarrett or Zealot. I mispronounced this guy's name like 5,000 times, but that's nothing new. So it's like Marcus, except he joins in Chapter 7 with slightly better stats. I remember his strength and speed being a little better, like a Marcus with +1 in both, if I remember correctly. But then his hit rate is a little worse because of worse skill and to a lesser extent luck. So that's not as good. Zealot used to be underappreciated as well. Not as much as Nime, but still everyone's like, yeah, he hoards your XP. It's like Marcus, but not even good in the early game. It's like, come on guys, he's still good for Chapters 7, 8, 8x if you want him there, 9. He's gonna be good for most of the mid game. Sure, he's not gonna one-dart enemies. A lot of units don't. He's not gonna double all that much. Like, it looks pretty underwhelming once you start promoting. But at that point, he's served his purpose. You can bench him from there and don't really need to use him. It's still some nice free utility. And in Chapter 7, he's an absolute lifesaver. Like, there is no reason not to want this guy to be around when you're like under assault by the Chapter 7 enemies. Like all those Wyvern Riders and Archers and Cavaliers. You'll take this guy's help. Like, you can use the Halberd to one-shot Cavaliers that have a Javelin equipped. I always try to do that. I think you can sometimes one-round them with a Silver Lance. Might depend on their speed and what they have equipped. But his weapon levels are better than Marcus as a base, I do believe. Marcus doesn't even have a C rank in swords at base. Whereas I believe Zealot can use the Killing Edge at base, for example. He has the X rank to use a Halberd. Marcus needs to grind for that. And you can also use the Silver Lance. He's got A-Lance lances, so A-rank lances. So all that is a pretty good package. If he joined earlier, sure, he'd be a lot better. But I still think he's a decent unit for a while. I definitely don't recommend using him past like 14, 15, unless you just want an extra Paladin for rescue drop utility. Which is something I can do. It can be nice, but it's not like super great. So I think the B tier might be a bit too high for him. But I do think he's better than Z, so maybe like the lower B tier is somewhere where he fits in. It depends on like how much you value a unit that contributes for like a little part of the game, but not for too long. I would put him like around Noah's point, honestly. I remember them being very close on tier lists before. So like around this point seems about fair. Sure, Noah is better in the long term, but it actually takes quite a while before Noah gets stats that match Zealot. So maybe he should be, yeah, he should be above Noah, I think. He gives you most of the free utility that Noah provides, but in a better way. It doesn't cost a Nightcrest to promote. So if you're gonna use one of these, I think Zealot will be more, you know, more friendly to your team composition. Like if you're using, for example, Alan in conjunction with one of these units, you'd much rather have Zealot because it doesn't cost a Nightcrest to be good. Whereas Noah does. So one of them, Noah or Alan's gonna have to promote later, and that kind of sucks. So I like Zealot in B-, I think, but it's a kind of hard unit to rate. I kind of like seeing him in the same tier as Ogma, for example, because Ogma is also kind of a short-term unit that isn't very good in the long term. He can be okay in the long term. He's not great. So I sort of think this is actually the right tier for him. I think C might be a bit too low for Zealot, but he definitely looks disappointing in the long term. So that's the risk of rating units on like one scale from like S+ all the way to down to like F- or whatever that's going to end up being. Whereas Zealot is very different depending on what point in the game he's in. Kind of like all those Radiant Dawn units, people like Soth, for example. The rating system like this doesn't really work for those kind of units, but it's still fun to like try to see where he fits in. But if there's a unit that's easy to know where she fits, that is Milady from the Binding Blade. So good. All right, way up to S+ we go. Wait, I lost. Oh, there she is. I'm so paranoid every time I lose my units in tiers. I'm like losing where they are. Okay, Red-Headed Wyvern Girl, to S+ you go. I think this is the best unit in Binding Blade. Very little competition there. All right, never mind. I lost Rutger for a moment. I don't know why. Anyway, Milady's somewhere going somewhere in S+. I just don't know exactly where. I think she's better than Rutger, although it's close. Rutger definitely more crucial in the early game because he exists and Milady doesn't. But Milady, I think once she joins, is better than Rutger from the moment she promotes, basically. Arguably from the moment she joins, depends on how much use you get out of her in her joining chapter and when you promote her. You can early promote Milady like right when she joins, because she joins at level 10, I do believe. So you can just trade her a whip and maybe an Iron Lance and a Javelin, and she's good to go for basically the rest of the game. But I always find it fun to make Milady like even better than she already joins. Her growths are pretty good overall. Remember her strength and speed growth being good enough to be functional after a couple levels. And you might as well take advantage of the fairly fast XP gain of FE6 with a somewhat underleveled unit like Milady. She's underleveled, but she's not underpowered. Like, her strength is humongous. Her speed is good enough to double when she just get rid of that stupid steel lance that she joins with. And her bulk is insane. It starts out decent and it just gets better and better as it goes on. At some point, she just doesn't even care about archers anymore. Granted, part of that's probably the Delphi shield, but her defense is so good. And FE6, it's just it needs to be stressed, like how much of FE6 enemies, like how bulky they are and how hard they are to kill reliably. And Milady is a flyer that can do it. That cannot be understated how good it is. It's like Har from FE10 joining you in FE6. It's insane. Like, other than Milady, who is one running in FE6? It's like Rutger if he gets a crit, which he probably does, but still he needs a crit. And Percival, I guess, who's gonna join like 3 chapters later, and he still needs like a silver weapon to do it. Milady, she might need the silver to like reliably one round, but the Killer Lance will usually two-shot most common enemy types, even like Cavaliers at some point, depending on what level we're talking. She can use a Horse Slayer, she can use a Javelin if you want to. It won't be too accurate, but she can actually pull it off sometimes. Iron Lance was something to shot stuff. Like, she's so strong compared to the rest of the cast. Like, even compared to someone like Alan or Lance, he's just gonna eclipse them in the bulk department. And of course, the flying utility in FE6 is just insane too. Like, there's so many mountains to cross. Like, Shanna gets up to where she is. I forgot exactly where I put her. I think I did rate her before though in a waifu video, at least. I'm pretty sure I referred to a waifu video on rating Shanna, but maybe I'm confusing it with the Pegasus Knight here. Oh, there she is, A+. Yeah, so she gets here mostly for being a flyer. Also, all the other stuff related to her Pitfalls waifu episode, but still, this is a lot of flyer utility right here. Milady is flyer and good combat. Like, one of the two alone, I think would actually qualify her for S- at least, but she has both. So I think I'm gonna put Milady. I had her like number 9 or number 10, like the best units ever. So I'm not sure exactly where that puts her here. I definitely think she's better than Dimitri and Edelgard. I'm kind of in doubt about Sida, but I'm gonna settle for like right here for now. Sida, like the one drawback of Milady is of course she only joins halfway through the game. That is her biggest drawback. I still think she's good enough to be up here, but she does miss about 12 to 14 chapters, depending on whether you count guidance, which I guess we should. So yeah, she joins about halfway through, but she's good enough for the latter half that I'm okay with having her all the way up here in S+, because the flyer utility on such a strong combat unit cannot be understated how good it is. It's so good. Okay, next we got Geese, still from Binding Blade, almost done with the Binding Bladers. And Geese, a lot of people used to debate Geese versus Gonzalez, and they ended up concluding that Gonzalez is better because hard bonuses. Kind of a short-sighted way to look at it in my opinion, but I do agree that overall Gonzalez is better at combat. The biggest drawback of Gonzalez is that you can't carry him around as easily because his constitution is so high. And that really is his biggest problem. Geese is more balanced stat-wise, but I never really liked that balance of stats on him because it generally makes him mediocre, not really particularly good at anything. But I kind of want to use him again because I'm kind of worried I sold him short because of the Berserker class. The Berserker class, I think, kind of redeems all that like mediocre, not good enough parts about him and makes him usable. And what I like about Geese is, so you can carry him around with like your Cavaliers and stuff because he's not as heavy. So there might be more utility for him. I do actually think if you're trying to play the game as fast as possible, someone like Geese might be more useful. Now, granted, you can get most of the utility you would get out of like training and promoting Geese just from using Garrett, but if you want to promote a unit, you can use him. You could insta-promote him, I think. He joins at like level 10, so you could use a hero crest to promote him. A lot of people are like confused when they first get Geese, and like, wait, how do I promote this guy? When do you get the Ocean Seal? But you just use a hero crest, which is kind of unfortunate because a lot of units use hero crests, but I'm not going to count it against them too hard. I generally don't even use the second hero crest on anyone, so for my personal playstyle, it would be fine. But I imagine if you're trying to use a unit like Fear or OJ or some other slightly suboptimal unit, then fitting Geese on your team might be a bit tricky. Might have to buy a hero crest in chapter 16 in the secret shop. But yeah, it's like his strength and speed and like pretty much everything about him is kind of average. I mean, his res is bad, but like a skill, for example, it's like, it's okay, but it's not going to make him reliably hit with axes because they're just that inaccurate. The one good thing about Geese, I guess, is that you can buy killer axes like the chapter after he joins. I believe in, like, at least in the A route, for example. Yeah, actually, you can only buy killer axes in the A route. It's kind of dumb, the Echidna route. So he joins in chapter 10, you can buy killer axes in chapter 11. And you can also buy killer weapons in chapter 13, but I forgot if killer axes are there. I know killer lances are. But either way, that helps. And then the moment you promote her, you promote him, he gets plus 30% crit. And he's going to demolish everything that he does crit. And between the killer axe and his base skill and everything, he's going to have like 60 crit at least on people. That is pretty good. And he doesn't need much more strength than what he has to one-shot stuff. And but I don't know if he doubles with like an early promotion or like 5 levels and a promotion. That is something I want to research in like a future FE6 playthrough at some point. I would like to play that game again with like normal units, not FE6 units, but I got a lot of things I want to play and I got a lot of units I want to use. Just like talking about these units makes me want to use them, honestly. So I think that puts Geese, I'm kind of expecting him to like end up in B or C, obviously, trying to find some units for comparison. I think he's worse than Garrett overall, just because of how much more free it is to use Garrett. The opportunity cost of Hero Crest exists, and so does the opportunity cost of training him. So somewhere below him, I feel like he has more potential in Trek overall. I think the offensive boost that Garrett gets from promotion makes him overall more useful than Trek's like mediocre combat forever and rescue dropping stuff. So I'll put him like around here somewhere. I think he's a unit with maybe more potential than I've been giving him credit for in the past, but I do remember every time I tried to use Geese just to kill normal enemies, I got like disappointed. Like before promotion, killing stuff with him is annoying. You use an Iron Axe, you have shitty hit, only one chance to hit, he's probably gonna miss. Try to use the Brave Axe instead. He misses twice and gets doubled because the Brave Axe is that bad. Don't use the Brave Axe on him, on anything except the wall. Like, Brave Axe is bad, guys. Don't use the Brave Axe. It sucks. But yeah, this seems roughly fine for him. I do think he's worse than Klein overall. Klein's free utility I think I like better than Geese. So this seems like an appropriate place for him. Last Binding Blade unit, we got Percival. And pretty much everything I said about Milady's combat kind of applies to Percival, in that like all the stats that matter are good, like HP, strength, speed. He even has like decent res compared to most of the other units. For some reason, pre-promotes generally get a little bit more res than Percival. I think he has like a 10 base or something. If you give him like a Pure Water, he's actually reasonably good at just fighting a bunch of mages. Granted, countering them is another story altogether. Javelins and hand axes kind of but just like a regular Iron Lance from Percival can just let him like one round a bunch of enemies. Give him a silver or killer weapon, he's definitely going to kill a bunch of shit. A rank lances, A rank swords, I think B rank axes from the top of my head. That gives you so many options. Like you can use all kinds of killer weapons with him and just get 50-50 shots as he's killing anything, even if it has high defense. You can use effective weapons. He has 8 moves, so you can get anywhere he wants. And armor bonuses, I already took it into account when talking about him, but even on normal mode, I find him strong enough. It's kind of sad that we recruit him in Chapter 13, he wouldn't have the armor bonuses, because it would be fun to have Percival in Chapter 13 and in Chapter 14X. I don't really care about him in Chapter 14, that's the desert. But 14X would have been nice to have him, but Chapter 15 is still reasonably early enough. Just like with Milady, it kind of sucks that he doesn't join earlier, but other than that, Percival is basically a perfect unit with like Seth-like stats, but an FE6, and there's almost no reason not to use him ever, because there's no opportunity cost of training him. Doesn't take a promotion item. He can't be RNG screwed or anything. His growths, they're not great, but he's still gonna get like a couple stat ups somewhere in a long way. And even at base, he's like completely irrelevant. I don't know if he could like solo the game or anything, but he could come pretty close. He's a pretty goddamn beast of a unit. So I don't know if he fits in S tier. I've always thought that Percival was like worse than Milady, Rutger, and maybe even Marcus, but I know that's like a hard sell because Marcus's stats are so much worse than Percival joins. But let's not forget where's Percival when Marcus was around being the best unit, right? So I think he's more of an S- kind of guy, and I think he's even a little bit worse than that. Yeah, he's great when you get him, but the lack of availability I think hurts him a lot more than Milady, because he doesn't have the flying niche to compensate for it. He's just a paladin. Still really good. S- is still super high. But I'd rather put him like around Oifi, Aris's level, I think, or like Xander. It's like 4 paladins in a row somehow. That's kind of a coincidence, but I do think Jake is better. I'm not sure about Byleth. I'm actually kind of wanting to move Byleth down for a while now. But I think this is roughly the right place for him. I think Percy's great. You should, if this was a tier list for chapters 15 onwards, he'd be like right up here somewhere. But it's not. It takes into account the whole game. And when you're missing 14 chapters plus 3 guidance, that's quite a lot. Next up is Yidis' favorite, Rebecca. So I want to praise Rebecca, I really do. I actually enjoy the idea of using Rebecca sometimes, because, you know, they bring me back to more simple times where you could use an archer and not worry that it feels bad. It's like, wow, you train up this unit that kills 1 enemy per turn, and that's if they get 1 round. It's like, I want to have better units than that, you know, but it's fun to use units like this. It's fun to go, yeah, she's totally bad, but I've still made it work because I'm that good at firing them, you know? That's kind of a good feeling. But FE7 is just not nice to units like Rebecca. It's not nice to units with a 4 base strength, with like 17 HP and like 3 to 4 defense, I believe, from the top of my head. She gets 2-shot by everything. And then they also put her in a class that just attacks once per turn, unless you like have them hug a wall with a bunch of mages on the other side or something. It's just not fun. When everyone else is capable of using javelins and hand axes to, like, even early game, you can already use them to great effect with like Hector and Oswin and Marcus and stuff. You can already have the advantages that Rebecca has without compromising your enemy phase too much. It still kind of sucks sometimes to have an inaccurate javelin equipped, but as the game goes on, that gets easier and easier, and then it just feels so pointless to use Rebecca sometimes, other than for flexing and for fun, or if you just like Rebecca, that kind of stuff. But it doesn't feel great for me. It's not the way I enjoy playing Fire Emblem. And in a context like this, in a tier list like this, Rebecca just doesn't look all that great. It is fun to avoid counters. That actually, I think if she was like a Myrmidon, with the same stats, she'd be worse, because then she would have to take counter attacks all the time. That would just like ruin her and a poor, like, terrible defenses. I think I actually don't mind her having a bow. And if FE7 had stronger enemies, was more player phase based, had weaker javelins, I think that would have made Rebecca more fun. If she just, Honestly, I would take like having more base speed, because I think that's one of her other things that could be niche about her, is like just having enough speed to double enemies, whereas other people couldn't. But in the early game, she's not doubling either. I can't think of a single enemy that she doubles in the early game besides like soldiers and armor that she does 0 damage to. And you know, those are the facts. Those are the facts. I do like the idea sometimes of like Rebecca supporting like Dart or Lowen or both, and just getting like plus 25 crit and plus 25 avoid and plus 5 attack. And that makes her, like, statistically, that makes her super strong. Something like a casual linker in a battle for something like that. That stuff is super fun. But for this kind of stuff, yeah, we're gonna have to like put her pretty low. The question is she better or worse than Nime? One thing I do like about Nime is, for one, the Orion's Bolt she has is all for herself. Although I think you get enough in Orion's Bolt in FE7 anyway, that's not a factor. The other thing is Rebecca also has to deal with the English version of FE7 having double effectiveness, so she can't even one-shot Pegasus Knights. Now that is stupid, so I think I'm gonna have to put her below Nime, unfortunately. I hate it. I really hate it. I actually really liked Rebecca on my first playthrough. I think I used her. I think I liked using her too, but bro, how can you make a unit this bad? It's so unfair. But I know why people like her, and that's fair. That's fair. Wrath, another bow unit from the Blazing Blade, a more interesting one. I almost think of Wrath as kind of like a pre-promoted unit that needs to be promoted a little bit, if that makes sense, because I find that Wrath is very, very situationally useful for like the 5 or 6 chapters after he joins. I think he has some really important niches that are really weird, but they work really well. And I think you actually have to train him if you want to get the lowest turn count sometimes. And the reason for that is his Nomad class is kind of unique. He's the only one in the game. And it takes less drain penalties. So for a chapter like Pale Flower of Darkness, he doesn't care as much about the snow as other units. So and he can go through forest unimpeded. So he's almost as mobile as a flyer, basically. And that makes him useful for carrying people around. He is a male, but he has low con, so high 8, so he can carry around Hector, which is something not a lot of people can do. I think that's basically just him and Heath and Eliwood, I think. Might be a couple of others, but generally male with low con, low-ish con is a good formula for being able to carry Hector around when he's promoted. That's a pretty cool niche. He's mounted with good 2 range. Most mounted units, they have like good 2 range with the Javelin, but if you want to fight a boss like Lloyd, for example, at range in 4-fanged offense, Wrath is one of the best ways to kill him on enemy phase. It takes RNG abuse to crit him with like a Brave Bow or something, but it's something they can do, whereas someone like Marcus with a Javelin is not going to get the job done. So that kind of stuff, it's all very niche, but it's there, and it's pretty cool. Fun fact, if you play Limb mode, you get a level 7 Wrath in that, and he's probably not going to get a whole lot of levels, because he's kind of over-leveled. He might get into like level 8 or 9, maybe, and he's going to join with C-Bows. If you kill him off in Limb mode, or you just don't play it, you play Hector mode, you get a level 9 Wrath instead with B-Bows. Much better. You can use the Brave Bow at base level, you pick up the Brave Bow in Dragon's Gate, and you actually have a really good player phase offensive nuke on your hands. Not super useful in FE7 for most chapters, but it has its uses. In, for example, Genesis, to kill many of the promoted enemies. Having someone who can either kill a druid with Luna, using the Brave Bow, or sniping them from long range with a longbow. All these kind of super niche stuff that Wrath can do, that's really cool. Overall, I don't think Wrath is great for something like a draft race, or just, you know, killing a bunch of enemies on enemy phase. But there's only these little tiny things that he can do that make him like pretty okay in my book. Not great, but like C tier at the very least. And I could see Don putting him even higher. I think he's a very interesting and cool unit. There's like all the little tricks he can do. I do think Isadora is better. I think Isadora has more potential to kill more enemies overall. But the things that Wrath can do, Isadora cannot replicate. But I think that overall, what Isadora can do is more useful overall. I'm gonna put him below Isadora as like a benchmark. Kind of like around here somewhere, I think. Yeah, I'm kind of like around this position roughly. All based on gut feeling. But really cool unit. Might be a waifu candidate someday. I kind of like Wrath. Then we have Nino. Thankfully, after all these days of pitfalling, finally people have sort of realized, hey, maybe Nino not the most optimal unit to use. That's okay. That's perfectly cool. I've never meant to make Nino units feel bad about using her. I like training her up. I had this video a long time ago. I did an FE7 negative growth playthrough where my units leveled down instead of up. So they did get level ups. They went from like level 4 to level 5. They wouldn't level down. But every time they leveled up, they would reduce their stats through the negative growth rate. So Hector would have a 90% chance of reducing his HP by 1 every time he leveled up. It made him terrible long term. Nino is probably the worst unit in such a context because her main selling point is her negative growth. The reason I'm talking about this is because I made like a side series where I trained Nino in Night of Farewells to level 2020 to try and see if I could get all her stats to reach level 0. Her HP couldn't for technical reasons. Their minimum HP was 1, I believe. So I did manage to train her up all the way to 2020 in the whole series. It was like 3 whole parts. But she didn't get every stat to 0, because apparently even getting from 0 to 0 was too hard for her. That's a tangent. I think everyone at this point knows Nino, not a unit that's going to be very high on this tier list. I don't think anyone is expecting her to be higher than F or maybe E tier. I'm not someone who trained Nino in the first playthrough and thought, wow, she's super good. I wasn't a big fan of her. I saw her and I was like, there's no point in training her. I have enough good units. Not even just like Pent or Urk. I have enough good units, period. I didn't really see the point of training her. I know a lot of people did on their first playthrough. They fell in love with her. They're like, wow, so cool. Kill everything. That's fair. It's totally fair. But yeah, we have bases this low and you're in a game where enemies are this easy to kill. Not a whole lot of point when it comes to efficiency. Nino is going to end up in F tier for sure. Exactly where? Yeah, pretty low. Pretty low. It's tempting to rate her higher based on potential, but at the same time, she joined so much later than a lot of these other units. I'll be fair, I'll put her over Wendy. I'm not sure about Liar. I've never tried Liar before, so she might be better. I might want to put her over Amelia or something, but like, I've had high tier units get dropped by entire tiers over a loss of availability. And that, look at Milady, for example. She would be much higher if she was available earlier. Look at Percival, for example, who I just rated. He's S- because he's not as available. Because he's not available for half the game, I put a unit that's mostly S+ material, an entire tier lower. Then we have Nino, who isn't only not good statistically compared to her peers, but she also joins in chapter 28X or 28. So that's a lot of availability to make up for. She have to be really good to make up for that, to be better than a lot of these other units. Because, for example, Arden joins in Prologue. Arden is available for the entire game, basically, if you count Gen 1 as one game. Nino has Lawrence tier availability, but then she also has Amelia level combat. It's ugh. It's not good. It's not looking good. But hey, Nino cool. Do my best. Our tour from the Sacred Stones, because that's where we're at right now. We're at Sacred Stones. Is one of the coolest units, I think, in LTC playthroughs of FE8. It's kind of funny that you have to train a unit in combat, and then once they promote, you have to suddenly switch to using stabs every turn to get him warp in an LTC playthrough. Normally, in a casual playthrough, the way Archer works is just kind of like any other mage. He just fights stuff and he promotes, and he gets C stabs because you turn him into Bishop for Slayer, and he kills every monster in one round. It's pretty cool. And then you can use Purge to kill monsters from long range. You can use all kinds of cool stabs. You can get him to warp if you want to. Having warp people across the map, that's a lot of fun on FE8. You can use Barrier on people, Torches, Restore, whatever you want. But I think most people who used Arthur in Sacred Stones just casually will remember him just killing monsters in one round. Just using a Lightning Tome. Just hey, there's a Cyclops. Let me just use maybe Divine or something to just get a 2-hit kill on this huge HP monster. Bishops are a lot of fun to use in FE8. I don't see a single reason to promote him to Sage. The only exception is that Sage is a higher magic cap. So if you wanted to get maximum warp range or something, then you could make him a Sage. But generally, Bishop is better. Big drawback of Sage, in my opinion, is that he only has D stabs, whereas his Bishop gets C stabs. That's a big difference. So I enjoy using Arthur quite a lot. I wish he had a bit more magic. I wish he was a little bit more like Lucius, like a glass cannon that gets a ton of magic, but they gave that whole role to Lute instead in FE8, so we're stuck with someone decent but not great magic, and then the awful GBA light tomes, where the light tome is 4 Mida base, so I think it takes him a while to start two-shotting stuff, but he provides chip damage from a safe distance. Enemies are dissuaded from hitting him because he counterattacks, so unless they can kill him, they generally don't go for him, and it's easier to position him in a way that he doesn't get countered and doesn't get killed in enemy phase. So overall, training him is not as tough as training someone like Tilt 2 or Nino or anything. And he joins earlier, he joins chapter 4. He's got a lot of ability going for him. And FE8 guiding rings also come very easy. The first one comes in chapter 5, chapter 5, 6 basically. And then the next one is chapter 10 or so, depending on the routes. So it's really not that hard to get him promoted. Not a whole lot of competition either, not a lot of other good guiding ring users in FE8. There are a lot of them, but there's not many good ones. I think Arthur is the best user of a guiding ring in FE8 by far. For efficiency's sake, I would put him pretty high actually. I think he's really good for warping utility alone. I'm trying to see where my other warper boys are. I got the A+ tier here with Saleh. I would say Saleh, if it was just Erica about Saleh, I would put him way above. Well, not way above, but above Arthur. The thing about Arthur is though that Ephraim Saleh exists. I think this is more of a case of Saleh moving down actually. I should move Saleh down to account for Ephraim route. So I'm going to put him down a little bit. Archer, I don't know if he's as good as Pent, but he does have the similar warping utility that these two guys have, so maybe it feels weird in A+. It feels very weird in A+. I don't know if I'm comfortable with him being here. But, you know, he's a pretty big part of efficiency playthroughs, and even for casual playthroughs, like just having a Bishop with Slayer is super nice. His durability is kind of trash, though. I will say for the late to mid game, it can be easy to get him killed. His luck isn't very good, so occasionally he will get crit. But, I don't know, I find it hard to like put him like in the same tier as the Three Houses boys. Like warp utility I rated very highly, as you can tell. I got like Pent and Nime here basically solely because of that. More Nime than Pent. Warp isn't very important in FE7, but Pent in general is just so good. Arthur looks like he looks kind of weird here, but like for example Salem here is the same similar role in that way. Mostly useful for A rank stabs, and his combat is kind of whatever. So maybe he's fine here in A+. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Alright, the double submitted Cormag, so I better make sure I get him right. So, Cormag is another one of those characters from Sacred Stones that greatly differs depending on the route you go on. If you go Ephraim route, he's in chapter 10, and you recruit him, I would say, about halfway through the chapter. I generally use Tana. I find it easier than using Dusel. I just fly Tana down to him, and talk to him, and then have him kill one of the other wyverns he's with, and then Tana pretty much cannot die. The tough thing about Cormag in that route is really just getting on one level and then promoting him. So basically there's no tough thing in that route. He's pretty good. I find that at first his hit rate with javelins might be a little shaky, and he doesn't always double everything. But it's like a better version of Heath almost, where that problem goes away more quickly. I believe it's the exact same growth as FE7 Raven, which includes a pretty good speed growth, so getting him to double stuff is pretty easy. I remember his luck being like slightly low, so occasionally he might eat a critical hit, but unless it's like thunder or some other kind of magic, he'll be fine. Wyverns, as always, they can use pure water to make up for the res weakness for most of the time, so unless there's like a Grado Druid using Berserk, you'll probably be fine against magic for the most part. Yeah, it's really, really strong and with a real powerful Ephraim route. Then on Erica route, you got like a bunch of players wondering, where's Cormac? Does Cormac not join in this route? Is he like dead or something? Because he joins like, he arrives on like turn, I want to say 6 or 9 of like the Ayas chapter, like the defense chapter where you can just kill the boss on turn 1 or 2 and then you just win. And Cormac never shows up, and you have to talk to him with Erica when he does, but then he just joins you, but it's much later. He does get auto-leveled. In the Japanese version, he's actually like really strong comparatively. But in the English version he's a little bit weaker, but still like perfectly viable. It's just he's not worth waiting for generally. It's kind of he's still really strong after he joins, but waiting for him feels a little bit bad, you know? That does feel a little bit bad. But for full recruitment runs where you just want everyone, there's no problems with Erica route Cormac, other than the fact that he misses like most of the mid game, which I think is a big like drawback of using it, don't get me wrong. Ephraim route Cormac, I would easily put him in A+ at the very least. Erica route more like B+ or A-. I'm gonna put him somewhere in A-, I think. Got a lot of like low ability flyers here, like Dean and stuff, so I think having him around here is fair. It looks weird because Ephraim route Cormac is so good, but the Erica route, I think it's a really big deal that he basically misses chapters 10, 11, and 12, and then a big part of 13 as well. So he's around for 14 and 15. The late game is definitely where the meat is of flyer utility in FE8, so I still think he's really good. I think A-, A+ is like a pretty good spot for him. I really wish he would just join early in Erica route. I'm not counting against him that he costs turn to recruit, just to make that clear. I'm just counting against him that he joins so much later in Erica route compared to Ephraim route. Other than that, though, I think he's like a perfectly serviceable, solid unit, like really good. I think he's like an improved version of Heath, basically. And I'm pretty sure, yeah, Heath is in the same tier. So, yeah, there you go. Now I want to put Heath over Cormac just because Heath doesn't have a route where he's bad. But Cormac's stats are easy to work with. Like, Heath has a bigger, you know, training requirement. He actually is level 7 at base, and it takes him a while to actually get good. Whereas Cormac, I feel, is more competent at base. So I still think this is fair. Wow, would you look at that? It's Seth. I wonder where he's gonna go. Let's go way up here. Not all the way to the top, but somewhere around here. Yeah, I think this is where I'm gonna put him again for now, unless someone can convince me that like something else is better. So busted, so busted. Seth is like one of the reasons that people think Sacred Stones is too easy, and people thought Sacred Stones was too easy even before it became acceptable to use your Jagans, and you know, before the EXP thief thing myth was kind of busted. God, Seth is so strong. I don't know what they were thinking. It's like, alright, let me give you a unit that's like the best at base, and then also give him the best growth in the game, and that'll work out fine. My guess is either they didn't think it would be so good to have him, or they just decided that the game needed to be easy, to be accessible, and they thought doing this contributes to such a thing. I'm guessing the latter is the case, because they had Marcus before, they had FE6 Marcus before, they knew how to make these characters less balanced, but I guess they just wanted a better version of these agencies. Maybe they just wanted to make people feel better for using this character, and then when they see like he gets good level ups, they're like, all right, I actually want to use this guy because he grows into a better character. He doesn't fall off. Maybe that was it. Either way, you can't go wrong with an 8-move paladin that joins in the prologue with A lances, A swords, access to javelins. Sure, they lost axes in FE8, but who cares? They never really needed them that badly anyway. I was almost just having the javelins alone as an option is good enough. And his stats are stupid. Like, I've never had a bad Seth in any game. Like, I've seen him get like worse than average level ups, but I've never seen him be bad. It's like every level up he gets feels so good, and he reaches like 20 strength and 20 speed and 20 skill in like no time. And it's like, man, this guy never dies. It's like the safest feeling ever. Even using him in Iron Man, the only way to get him killed is like to fight a halberd or something. It's like, just stop, dude. Why are you the best boss killer? The best way to use rescue utility. He's got good supports as well. There's like no weakness to this guy. Absolutely busted ass unit. Like, you could power level Franz and promote him and get like something slightly similar, but even then you have no, like, Seth has more res. Like, he can just take on mages on enemy phase for days. He can just take like 0 damage from a lot of mages with pure water, sure, but still. He still has A rank lances for like silver lances. Franz is never going to be able to use the armor slayer unless you dedicate training his sword rank, but Seth is like, no, I can use armor slayer or heavy spear depending on what you want me to do, and use almost any weapon you would want him to use, honestly. He can choose what S rank weapon he gets, so usually in FE8 you have a lot of lance users, because those are generally in the best classes, like the flyer classes and the cavalier classes, so you almost always already have someone who can use the Vidofnir, the S rank lance. But you don't always use a sword unit. I mean, I usually don't. It depends on the person. But it's harder to find a really good sword unit. The sword units are generally a little bit worse. Is probably the best way to phrase it. You got like Joshua, who's like Garrick. Those are pretty good. But Garrick also has like the Garm as an option. So you don't always have an autonomous user. Seth can use it. He can just use a steel sword like 25 times maybe. Probably a little bit more, but he might kill with it, you know. So yeah, that'll get into S rank swords, and then you have an Altoma user that you want. I hate pronouncing that word, Altoma. So I'm talking about that because it's like a niche thing that people don't really talk about with Seth. How many more times do you need me to say 8 move, kills everything at 1 to range, invincible? Like, that covers it basically. But I think the S rank sword thing is kind of cute. I still like S rank lances on him though, just to get 5% extra accuracy on javelins and stuff. But swords are nice too. Yeah, easy S+. Easy S+. Alright, La Rochelle, she's also mounted. She has that in common with Seth, and she's in Sacred Stones. I think the similarities end there. She can't attack anything. She joins at like level 3 Troubadour, about halfway through the game, a little bit over it. I feel like I use that phrase a lot, but it applies to her, so might as well use it again. And yeah, she has D rank staffs, so she can use Torch to get staff rank and experience, I guess. That's like the best way to go about it. Just torch up the ghost ship a little bit. And then maybe grind her in skirmishes, honestly, because doing it during chapters is so tedious. You have to like heal HP level ups or like unnecessary wounds with Mend. Still goes pretty slow, like Mend is 12 XP. You want to get to promotion and then like preferably a lot more levels, because her growth is so good and her bases are good for her level. But most unleveled characters, they have the advantage that like they can kill enemies and they will get like 50 to 60 to like a full level up for XP. La Rochelle doesn't gain extra XP for being unleveled. In fact, it just handicaps her. It's terrible. And her horse only has 6 moves, because in Sacred Stones all the horses are worse than FE7 ones. So yeah, a bit of an unfortunate class to be unleveled in, but still workable. I used her on my first playthrough. I enjoyed it, but I did grind. Like, I used like all the trainees and I used La Rochelle. I just didn't care. And it works out fine, but in the context of this list, not that great. What I really wish you could do is something like an FE7 where you could like buy barrier staves in a secret shop and use her. But you can't do that in Sacred Stones because she can't use barrier at base, so you gotta like, grind her staff rank up a little bit. But you can just, if you just use barrier every turn without any need for enemies like hurting your units, that way you can use turn 1 freely, position yourself more easily. Being able to use it on whoever you want makes it much easier, but unfortunately that is not an option. So La Rochelle, I'm gonna say like F tier as well. She's really not that good. Maybe E tier, but the unleveled BS really gets to me, honestly. Yeah, around here seems fine. I like being able to rescue job with her though for free. I actually enjoy that utility in the Radiance chapter. And I think that's pretty nice. I'm not going to give her points for recruiting Redneck. I don't think that counts. I don't think that counts. Alright, Rossi boy is next. I made a waifu on him. I think I was pretty thorough on that one. And it was kind of a waifu on Garcia as well. I kind of compared the two, like at different points in the game. And I generally find that Garcia is better at combat at Ross when they start. And then Ross grows better and better. And in the end, Garcia and Ross are still pretty much comparable. There are differences between the two. Ross is definitely a little bit better at the end, particularly in speed. But the difference isn't huge, whereas it definitely is when they first join. So I definitely think Ross is a worse unit at fighting than Garcia. What Ross does have, though, that Garcia doesn't, and very few other units do not have, is water walking ability. I think Ross's promotion by far the best one is Pirate and then Berserker, because water walk is pretty useful. I got into it a little bit with Dazla over here, and Ross is like Dazla, but without all the I think it's got a little more speed, not too much more, and a lot more luck and a lot more hit rate in general. Like just better stats all around. I think his HP is a little bit worse overall than Dazla's, but generally I think Ross is better at Void too. Ross is better on enemy phase overall and more capable of one-running enemies. So I think Ross is a better long-term unit. But of course, Dazla is like the opposite, where he just doesn't take any work to be pretty serviceable, whereas Ross, he takes a lot of work to get good. For a trainee though, I don't think his situation is too bad. He joins in this earliest chapter 2, and within like 3 or 4 chapters when he joins, it's possible to get him to Pirate, or at least have him level along with your other units. So it's not too bad. You don't even have to slow down. Like I used him in an LTC playthrough, and it's possible to train Ross without slowing down your other units, and even possible to use him without slowing down Franz and Vanessa's XP gains, which is a good thing. But that definitely took a lot of planning, and if you're not willing to do that much planning, you're just playing it casually, you're free to just get Ross to like his level 10 or whatever in like 2 or 3 chapters by just playing slowly. That is pretty doable, not even that bad, not even that hard. It's not the way I tier units generally, but it's something you can do if you're just playing casually, and it's totally fine. So I think Ross is more like I think Ross and Garcia are both kind of like C tier units mostly. I find it like late in the game, there's not much purpose to them, but they can have good late game offense using the Garm or the Brave Axe, or if you want to be risky, the Devil Axe. Like if you're going to use the Devil Axe with anyone, might as well be Ross with a super high luck growth. So like kind of Nephany Azel vibes. It's like Azel units here that just take quite a bit of work but actually end up pretty good. Like Eda's kind of like that as well if you want to actually train her. Yu is kind of like that. Tiki is kind of like that. So it kind of works out, I guess. I just don't want to put him too high, but I don't think the water walking is too good. There's like a couple of situations where it's nice. Mountain walking as well is pretty cool. But it's all kind of niche, you know. It's not really necessary, or it doesn't really add too much to a chapter clear. Besides maybe the river chapter, the chapter where you go up to Rado's castle. I forgot what it's called. Chapter 7 in Sacred Stones. That one is like pretty nice to have a pirate for. But to get him to pirate there, in like LTCs, you gotta rush. You definitely gotta rush his levels. So I'm gonna put him right here for now. A little above Dazla I think is fair. He does have more availability, and once he gets to pirate, he's generally on par with your other units for the most part, especially for casual playthroughs. So I think it's fair to give him credit for most of his availability, even if his start is pretty bad. Like, don't get me wrong, his start is awful. Like, if you try to use him as a normal unit, he gets his butt kicked. He's got the terrible bases. He's got worse bases than everyone else, but my wife was very elaborate on this, so I think I can be a little short on this one. I think everyone who's used Ross knows, like, God, this guy does not double anything, dies in 2 hits, maybe 1 hit, gets double a lot. If he's not using the hatchet, he's probably going to miss. That's Ross at base level for you. Terrible, but usable. And then Garcia is like what you get if you train Ross for a while and you give it the water walking for lack of training. I think Garcia is pretty good early game utility. I love him in chapter 3, being able to throw hand axes at people through walls, or using it to bust walls. Chapter 4, he one-rounds I think every monster besides the boss in that chapter. Maybe he doesn't double some of the enemies, but he doubles the relevance at least. Chapter 5, one-rounds all the soldiers, 2-shots most of the guys. Sure, he's got a bad speed growth. He's kind of like Dorcas, decent base at like 6 I think, but then like a 20% growth, so it's not going to go up too much. But Garcia's speed is quite salvageable. It's got, it's enough to where, like, if you're willing to give him Speed Wing, which are not super contested in FE8, not that many units are close to the doubling threshold, but not quite there, so he's good for that. And then a hero promotion, he will probably double a lot of shit. Not everything, but like, I don't know, Wyvern Riders, Archers, that kind of stuff, he can double those. He's pretty fine, actually. And his strength is huge, so even with just a hand axe, he 2-shots most enemy types. He's pretty bulky thanks to his high HP and reasonably high defense. It's not super high, but enough of an HP pool to, you know, soak a couple hits, get healed up, and continue. And F8 is pretty enemy base heavy, so it's kind of nice to just have a unit you can throw out there to kill a bunch of enemies. And basically what you end up happening is, like in a route map, for example, like chapter 15, the desert map, you put him somewhere, he kills enemies over and over until the map is over. And that means that units like Franz have Vanessa can go somewhere else to kill enemies. So he can hold his own, maybe occasional healing support, maybe using elixir occasionally, but he can do fine on his own. That's, I think, the mark of a pretty good unit overall. Again, late in the game, I find that these kind of units don't have as much utility. Like once you get like the Gorgonite chapter, it kind of just becomes the warp and flyer show for me. And if you're playing slowly, you can get some hits in, but it feels like more like self-improvements than really helping to clear chapters. But sure, if you give him the Garm or something, he can still help you get through chapters, kill bosses, that kind of stuff if he gets in range. If you're playing at that tempo, Garcia functions just fine. I'm putting like around the same point as Ross. Which one of these is better depends on like how much you value Water Walk versus how much you value just having better bases off the start. And I think they have similar combat overall. I said Ross is a little bit better at combat in the end, but I think Garcia's huge gap early on gives him the lead overall. Like if you compare Ross's bases to Garcia's bases, it's an absolute trashing. Garcia is much stronger. And that gap doesn't really, it becomes smaller, but it never really goes away. And when it does, sure, eventually it does, but it doesn't really compare to the gap that was there early on. Alright, Path of Radiance, boys and girls. Yeah, we got 2 of those. Okay, alright, okay. So, I haven't played Path of Radiance a lot recently. I do remember Largo and Khalil's performances roughly. I think Largo, I don't think he doubles reliably. And, you know, I remember his HP being like really huge, and then he just fights an enemy. And 2 enemies later, he's low on HP, he's kind of done. Gotta heal him to start over again. He's got like huge speed growth, I remember, but I don't remember if he doubles very reliably. And I think it's the crux of his offense. Defensively, I just think his Void is like not reliable enough. One of the big parts of that, I think, is that he just doesn't come with any supports, whereas most of the units you've been using up until that point have built up supports, and especially Earth supports are going to give units like massive durability edges over Largo. So that makes him look like a lot worse. I'm not sure if it's supposed to say Largo or Largo. I kind of wish we got like a Talia's remake just to tell us, that stuff. But yeah, I was never too impressed with Largo, but I know he can become pretty competent if you just train him up, at least offensively. I don't know if his bulk issues are ever resolved. I know his resistance is always going to stay bad, for example, so I guess like long range magic, that's never going to be fun. But I don't think it's going to die on you in like 1 or 2 hits, but after that, he probably will. I don't remember when you get the recover staff in FE9, that might be significant to him, because if he gets hit and you heal him with Mend, but he doesn't actually fully top him off, he might just die sooner, but I think those are like details overall. The other problem with Largo, of course, is like no mounts. FE9 is very, very mount dominated. You get tons of good mounted units, flyers, and cavalry. His joining chapter, I think his joining chapter is actually not that big of a difference, because the mountain, you know, discourages mounts to begin with. But after that, pretty much every map is very mount dominated. So, not a big fan of Largo overall. I put him like a D or C tier. Man, I'm gonna say D tier, like the top of D tier maybe. He's like alright, but yeah. I almost want to say Devdon is better, honestly. Where's Devdon at? He's here. He's right here. That was Dunvad. That people make this mistake a lot. I like him better because he's me. He's not me, but like I just like him better. All right, I just like him better. He joins like a couple chapters earlier, I want to say. I believe his durability is overall better. Night Ward helps a little bit, and I think he has a chance to build supports up too. But I don't think they give a lot of a void, because I don't think fire gives a void. So maybe that's not something that can really hold against him. I don't know, I just feel like they're roughly as good as each other. Then we have Khalil, Largo's wife, and I think she's quite a bit better. I think her main pro is just her weapon ranks at base. I think she can use all kinds of long-range magics at base. At the very least, bolting and meteor, from what I remember. I don't remember if you get a blizzard. I do remember you getting a blizzard. So she can use those, and that's something that not a lot of other units can do. Someone like Soren or Ileana can probably learn like one of those, but not a lot of these. And she just being able to use them at base is super nice. Enables some like really fast clears, and or just some clutch, you know, boltings from a distance. One of your units is getting harassed, you don't have anyone near, you can just bolting that guy to death. I think you can even double with them depending on certain thresholds. I think also Thunder Magic is like effective on Wyverns, for example, so that stuff also opens up possibilities. And then like in general, she just has like decent, you know, parameters to just double and kill stuff. I don't know if she has it at base. You kind of wish she had staff utility, but she picked knives for some dumb reason, so That is out of the picture, but still, just being able to like one-round enemies if he just gets a couple of speed level ups. I don't remember how far she's from doubling though, which is the main part of her offense that I think matters the most. Durability-wise, I don't remember her being spectacular, but she doesn't die in one hit, so as long as you can keep her safe, it's fine. Lack of amount kind of hurts, but I do think she's at least a tier over Largo. Let's see, where's the other FE9 squad at? There's not a lot of FE9 units on this list, period, which makes sense because I don't know a lot about them. I think she's better than FE9 and Volk for sure, a significant amount. Maybe check this tier real quick. Not a lot of FE9 here. Most of the other FE9 units I tier are like in the S plus tier or like in the S minus tier, but like pretty far up. So I don't think she's nearly as good as like Kieran, for example. I think he's significantly better. Astrid, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I don't think she's B plus. I think she's B minus at best. And honestly, maybe more like a C tier unit, but like a high C tier unit. I kind of like the Glade feel of this. Yeah, we're gonna go with like around here, I think. This seems fine for her. Funny that she ended up next to Dorothea, who's also mostly known for long range magic. I think Khalil's like fine, but you know, durability is a thing, lack of amount is a thing, lack of staves is also sad. I mean, a lot of units don't have staves, but you kind of wish he had staves, you know? But the bolting niche is super cool. It kind of reminds me of Wrath, where he's like one or two things that make him like super interesting for a couple of scenarios. Then there's Rolf, and they kind of forgot how to make good units when they made Rolf. I don't know what happened there, but he has like all the problems that Nime and Rebecca have, but he's in a game with like really competent fellow units. Like he's so much worse than everyone else. Because, okay, so imagine FE7 with Rebecca, but instead she has Will's joining time, but no option for Lin mode. You just get Rebecca in chapter 17, and just nothing going for her. Like a personal weapon that doesn't really do much. Personal weapon with like no real benefits over an iron bow, no real big ones. That's Rolf. That's basically Rolf. It's he's not good. FE9 is another one of those games where javelins and hand axes just reign supreme and kill everything, or at least good units are capable of using them and hitting enemies with them, and eventually they will die. Even in Maniac mode, they will die. And you have a unit like Rolf that can only attack on player phase, but his stats are worse than everyone else. There's no upside to using Rolf, unfortunately. I think Rolf is like the only unit that almost everyone playing FE9 can agree on is pretty bad. Like FE9 tier lists are always a mess because you can bonus experience everyone up to be decent, but even bonus experience does not save Rolf's ability to be in a like good class, or in a bad class. His prospects are pretty bad. His growths are pretty okay. I remember. I think his speed is like you can get him to double at some point, and his strength goes is actually like good. I believe. It's just there's no point. There is no real benefit. It's still fun to use him if you enjoy him, but I don't know. He just kind of looks like a fucking baby. I don't know. I don't want to use him, man. He's not great. He has the triangle attack, I guess. That's pretty cool. I've never used an FE9, but it's like you gotta make Oscar use bows and then put a bow on Boyd as well and just triangle attack something. FE10 Rolf, that one can use a fun triangle attack. I saw a guy kill the final boss with like all triangle attacks in one turn. It was super glorious. But that's FE10 Rolf. FE9 Rolf, I haven't seen him do as many funny things. Even the double bow in FE9 is kind of like a joke. And FE10 it's like super cool. FE9 it's like bleh. I think it has 1-2 range, but no like 3 range or anything, and no super high might or anything. You get it like final chapter. They really improved a lot in FE10 compared to FE9 when it comes to bows. I gotta say that. Rolf is F tier for sure. Here, I guess he does have availability, and he can be good with bonus. And by good, I mean he can be salvaged with bonus experience, but no. Last unit on this list is Titania. Still Path of Radiance, still super good. Paladin, access to Nightward, javelins, hand axes, high axe rank, super cool design. That also counts, I guess, but not really. Available early on, way better than everyone else. Like compared to everyone else, she doesn't die ever, kills everything at 1-2 range. Think of like a chapter like the one where you get Soren for the first time, I think. I think Soren, no, not Reese, just Soren. And you have like Gatri, Shinan, Ike, and Titania. Imagine that chapter, but don't use Titania. Imagine how many years of your life it would take to beat that chapter. But if you put Titania in there, it still takes a long time. But you can put it in the middle of a bunch of enemies, and then you can go and get coffee, or eat lunch, or read an entire book, and you come back and Titania has killed all the enemies. That alone is worth S+ tier in my book. Not really, but you get the point, right? It's like Seth, but in the game with like more competent units, so maybe she doesn't deserve to be this low. compared to Seth, but it's still S+ tiered, right? It's still super good. Maybe I've heard a lot of people say Titania falls off in FE9. I don't know if I really agree with that. I haven't had any recent samples of like using her in FE9 or anything. I think if you're diligent about making sure she's a Night Ward when she levels up, which I think is easy to do because her XP gain is so slow compared to everyone else. Like, promoted units don't gain much in FE9 to begin with because there's not that many promoted enemies until way later on. And then she's like promoted and then like probably 8 or 9 levels above your other promoted units at that point. Depends on how many times you use her. So making sure she has a Night Ward like every time she levels up is so easy, especially when with bonus experience in the picture. So I don't see why you wouldn't be able to give her like an effective, like I think it's like 70 or 80% speed growth. And you know, if she's still doubling, her strength should be reasonably good, especially with axes. She might have to use like a silver axe in a place where someone like Kieran can get away with an iron axe. But you have these resources available, so I don't see why this would be a big drawback to using her. I still think this is easily still one of the best long-term units in FE9, and that I'm not even talking about the short-term, like Jagan-esque things about Titania where she's better than everyone else in the early game. I'm talking pure mid-late game. I think she's still one of the better units you have. She might not be as good as Oscar and Kieran at that point, but overall, I still think she's more useful than those units. I forgot what exactly moved Kieran. He's like an A+ tier right here. I do think Titania is better overall than Kieran. I can see situations where Kieran is better in the late game, and I do think there's that many situations where a flyer like Jill or Marcia is more useful than Titania overall. But I think Titania's sheer ease of use, her sheer amazing power in the early game compared to everyone else wins out over Marcia. I would, if I had to pick a unit for like a draft race or something, I might pick a flyer over Titania if Titania was draftable. She usually isn't. She's usually free, just because it's so unfair if one player gets it instead of not, which I think is a good sign for her. So that's why I'm putting Titania this high. I also had her in my top 15 best units of all time. As you can see, my opinion hasn't changed very much so far, but maybe the future will make it change a little bit. But yeah, that's the tier list. That's all the units I had to tier for today. Quite a few. Next time we're going to get into Radiant Dawn and onwards. We have like 3 houses units, of course, next time, so look forward to that. Thanks to everyone for supporting me on Patreon. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit, you know, dizzy every now and then, a little bit weird every now and then, but the heat is making recording this not super easy, but I hope you had a good fun time anyway. Thanks everyone for supporting me. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Posts, comments. Peace.